Here we go, people. My apologies. I was kind of the hold up, but this is the John Schneider Seahawks press conference reaction episode of Seattle Overload. We've got a lot to talk about. I know some people have read a lot into that. We'll see how much we've read into that. Apologies for those of you who were, actually here at 6 p.m. Pacific time when it's just gone 7 p.m. Pacific time and they've gone live. Ricardo, good to see you. Christopher, good to see you. Noi Gash, good to see you. Jack, good to see you. Matt, good to see you. Axel, good to see you. Vince, good to see you. Rares Gaming, good to see you. And everyone else, that you were the first people. You were the guys there who you're camped outside, thinking we were going to open on time, and we haven't. So enough of that. I know that there's a lot of interest around the team, so let's we'll get into it pretty quick. Griff, do you have a preamble topic?
Dude, I'm watching some of the old 2014 LB games, and Michael Bennett is just like incredible. Like he honestly, in some of these games, he's the best player on the field.
Yeah, I mean, I'm telling you, you told me in a number of ways. Then I told you, like last year when I rewatched it, I was just astonished at how good he was.
I can't believe I can't believe he wasn't talked more of.
Because he's like a three gapper who gets like TFLs at the point of attack like constantly. I don't understand.
Yeah. And he knows exactly what the offense is doing every snap. He's never wrong. He's never wrong.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of things which made that defense work, but he got them out of a lot of bad situations and into a lot of good plays, like just by being an absolute baller.
And both Chris Long and Gerald McCoy both independently said that Bennett was like a computer in terms of like processing, like knowing what the offense does based off of tendency, and then being able to diagnose and stuff. Like Chris Long was like,
who played with him, right?
Yeah, in Philly for like 1 year, like in his last year, second to last year, they're like, I don't know how Bennett did what he did. He just knows what's happening all the time, like a true like football savant. Insane player, just insane player, and he can do anything. He could do absolutely anything. He could be a full-time Leo. He could be a full-time 3-tech.
Yeah, it's like if you don't have a 20 sack season in your career, then people don't understand that you're the top.
Yeah.
And there's like different types of those edges, right?
Yeah.
Like I guess how many of the guys who get acknowledged, how many of them are that kind of 5-tech type,
Mm-hmm. Right.
That like
they don't exist. Honestly, I mean, Jerzon Newton could play at 280, right? But he still can't spend his whole time on the edge, right? Guys, is it just Jack who's having trouble hearing me, or is it everybody?
I can hear you absolutely fine, Griff. So
okay.
But
Jack.
But yeah, chat, please do keep us abreast of that. And then I guess like Calais Campbell's like the 3-tech version, right?
Yeah. Because that's the thing with those guys, right? Like there are 3-techs that could play 5, and there are 5-techs that could play 3. But very few of them could like actually be full-time in either spot, and you wouldn't think anything of it, It's like Bennett is like truly like Rasheem Green. No, not Rasheem Green. Cam Jordan is the only other guy that I can think of that really fits that bill. And even then, he became more of an edge toward the end,
Mm-hmm.
Fellas, I'll try to project my voice.
I mean, I can turn you up. Griff is soft-spoken a little. I mean, it could also be that my mic is way too loud.
Oh, could be.
Hold on. This is good. This is excellent feedback. Let me just do that. Now, chat, you'll have to tell me if I'm too quiet. Yeah. We'll have to see how that all shakes out.
Also, like, all right, so watching the 2013 and 14 defense back, it's very clear the best players are Earl, Cam, and Sherm. Like Bobby and KJ were very good, but they really weren't They really weren't what we
Yeah.
think of them as until like
No.
15, 16, 17.
Yeah. But Bobby could move like very impressive, and I think like just finding the ball, like he kind of stood out, right? But KJ, it's kind of crazy how he talks considering what he was in the defense, which is okay. That's fine. And he did become an unbelievable zone coverage defender later in his career. And I know, Griff, you've been impressed as well. So have I, by his like ability to, even when he was declining, say, as an athlete, his zone coverage just got better and better. Like he just seemed nailed into what the offense was presenting, like the pre-snap, post-snap indicators, and how that influenced his coverage drops.
Right.
I mean, Cam is crazy because he basically he plays, in layman's terms, but he plays inside backer, edge, strong safety, and then high safety. He does like 5 different roles at a very, very high level, which make all the defensive structures work. Without him,
he corrects so many people in the defense, like post snap. Like Bobby screws up, KJ screws up, like especially early on with pullers, like they couldn't handle. Like Cam's just always in the right spot. Like it's actually like, I mean, at the time, I remember being like a Bobby Wagner truther around 2012, 2013. Like, no, he's as good as Kuechly and stuff. You could not convince anybody outside of Seahawks fans that Bobby Wagner was as good as Kuechly. And now, like, I'm definitely walking back the perception I had at the time, knowing what I know now. Bobby becomes as good as him in late 14, 15, 16, right?
yeah.
But at the time, I'm like, wow, he's actually not exactly the player that I thought he was, just knowing what I know now, being able to look back at it. But I mean, still a very good player, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
He was still a Pro Bowler and everything. But yeah, it was like just Cam, Earl, and Sherm are just absolute, and Bennett are like just absolute world breakers at their positions. Anyway, that's my preamble topic.
Well, it's an exciting preamble topic, and it hints at, I mean, it could be that the Seahawks announce their head coach, later in the week. That feels unlikely given what we know. So if there is no kind of concrete news out of Seattle and there's nothing that we feel deserves discussing, or heck, we could still do 2 more podcasts this week. But as a Pete Carroll tribute, we're going to do a live All-22 breakdown of Super Bowl 48, where we'll explain the defensive calls. If that's something you're interested in, please do leave a live comment. Let us know that you're interested in that. It'll 100% inspire us to do that. But I think that's something we've been up for doing for a while, and there's no better time for doing that. Also, in the off season, we might be able to look at that whole, as Griff suggested, the whole playoff run was unbelievable. I mean, they're just playing like at such a good level, and it didn't even matter if they had I mean, Malcolm Smith was a really good player. Like he was doing some really good stuff.
He had some good games for sure.
Right. Thank you very much, Chad. Good to see the interest. Griff, should we do that thing we do? Anything else on your mind?
The only thing on my mind is you hitting it.
Is
racing.
Wow.
Hey, we're open-minded. Matty, hit it.
Hey, it's 3:22 a.m. Welcome to the Seattle Overload podcast, where Seahawks general manager John Schneider has held a press conference today, today being Tuesday, the 16th of January, 2024, to essentially talk over Pete Carroll's departure, but also get asked, thoughts on how the season ended, what his role is now that Carroll is gone, and the Seahawks head coaching search, which is well underway. We're already getting names out there. As we learned more about John Schneider's role today. We learned about how all sorts of things are going to work out. But Griff, any main takeaways before we dive into it?
I mean, not really. I think we'll dive into it, right?
Yeah, but you were saying how a lot of people have read a lot into this and taken a
Um,
lot from this, but you personally,
he offers a lot, but then he also kind of counters himself a lot on purpose. So I think he's trying to just like acknowledge, like, I think he wants to signal to ownership certain things, but then he also wants to show them like he's aware of it, like what this has been hasn't been good enough. I don't know if he's necessarily critiquing any one person, but then he also said like we all underachieved. I thought it was interesting that he emphasized that they overperformed in 2022, underperformed in 2023, and he used those last 2 years. He didn't speak to any previous years. Like they really view like post 2021 as a new era. So I thought that was an interesting way to characterize it. But then, he kind of goes on to say some things about like what he's looking for. I don't think he might very well be looking for something in particular with the coaching search, but I don't think he in this presser really hinted at it, because he kind of made arguments for defensive or offensive or special teams, and then kind of made arguments against each one too. So I don't really know. We also have the directive Jody mentioned. Where I'm getting ahead of ourselves. So yeah, beyond that, I probably don't put too much stock into it. So how
yeah.
about you?
I mean, it's the point in the season, especially of what's happened, the point in the off season where it's very tempting to read a lot into what we're seeing because this is all we have, really.
Yeah,
But yeah, I mean, watching it through the first time, I was like, whoa, there's some stuff coming out here, and Schneider seems kind of downbeat, and he looks sad about Pete. But actually, like watching it back, I've watched it back too many times, and I want to admit, but I think he's just striking the right balance, and really, he kind of says a lot of everything without really saying much. I don't think he gave too much away. It's just interesting seeing his type of style with handling the media, his type of energy compared to Pete Carroll's. Tommy pointing out in the chat, he just looks tired. Yeah, I think he's probably got a lot on his plate right now. I mean, he's had to fight for his life in Seattle, so it's been a stressful period for him, I think. So the first thing to talk about is he described, as Griff said, he described high expectations of 2023. We overachieved in 2022 and we underachieved in 2023. Said that they all did underachieve in 2023, which, is interesting. I'm sure Pete Carroll was talking about a championship before that season behind the scenes. You know how publicly he's so excited. So, I mean, and I think everyone had higher expectations than them missing the playoffs and going 9-8 again. So, not really too much to doubt there. Now, the other thing is John Schneider's role has changed. So he described his role change by saying, our setup earlier was, and it's been a question for a number of years, the coaching staff did not fall under my umbrella, and now it will. It's not necessarily a Jody Allen decision or choosing this person or that person. It's just a contractual situation. And asked by Brady Henderson of ESPN if he'll have the final say over the personnel decisions regardless of who the next head coach is, Schneider very quickly answered yes. So Griff kind of expected, right? But he is now the overseer, other than obviously Jody Allen as the
right.
Seahawks chair being involved.
Right. So he's the highest ranking football personnel staff member in the organization now. So yeah, it's John's show now. So I'm sure he and Pete had a lot of overlap, but I'm sure they disagreed on some stuff. Because why wouldn't they? I mean, I can imagine any two coworkers agreeing on everything all the time. That's just, especially over 15, 14 years, it's just not realistic. It will be interesting to see if we see like stark philosophical shifts in terms of like what positions he, what positions he invests in. Also, that could also reflect though what the new coaching staff might want too, because I think a good GM works with his coaches, right? You don't want there to be a disconnect. So it may not necessarily be John's opinion so much as this is just what makes sense for the general collective vision to move forward, right? We'll see on that, right?
Yeah. So the coaching search. Schneider described, we have a clear directive from Jody Allen moving forward as we embark on our new coaching search. It's clear, it's concise. We want to keep our positive culture, everything that's been created here, everything in this building. There are so many special people in this building. And he said it's great to get on the phone and explain to them, like, hey, there's a foundation here and it's incredible. And that was all in Schneider's opening statement. He also referenced that Seahawks culture later on. When asked what qualities he prioritizes in the next head coach, he said, our culture and how we are evolving, who's going to help us move to the next level, how are we going to compete with everybody that we need to compete with and advance this organization moving forward. So he's open to different philosophies and different opinions and different ideas, which is a point he made keen to emphasize. But I guess not necessarily a surprise, Griff, but there's a there's a 14-year culture in place from Pete Carroll and John Schneider, but also, people who've been in an organization that Schneider referenced, like Chuck Arnold, their president, Dave Pearson, who works in PR, not quite sure on his full title, but he's been there for ages, Mo Kelly, and Eric Kennedy and stuff. Not a surprise, Griff, but to be expected that they're wanting to not have a complete culture shock, a continuation with some new stuff.
Yeah, them emphasizing the culture, basically, that's Pete's culture, right? They want to hold on to the good stuff and then improve on the stuff that can be improved on. But
make the playoffs and win a playoff game, basically.
Right. Yeah. And then John also mentioned how, like you said, the foundation. They think that the roster is an attraction to a new coach. He likes the core, signals he doesn't want to blow up the roster. He's probably going to make the roster moves he would have made anyway had Pete stayed on, right? Again, with maybe here and there minutia, but I think he makes the big decisions with Jamal. Maybe Quandre, I'd be surprised though, and then looks at Leonard Williams and Jordan Brooks, and beyond that, it's just your drafting for your roster, right? And doing your usual like housekeeping at the bottom of the depth chart for each position. But I don't see this as like them looking to reject the status quo so much as just like we're taking another shot at it with a new voice, and then we'll let that voice do his job at the same time. And then the culture thing, that definitely signals, like, do they want a guy that they think can like lead a program, so to speak? Now, not to the extent that Pete could because of the power dynamic with John being at the top now, right? Like in name and in practice. But clearly that's important. Like they want a guy that can lead a group full of players, right? And the coaching staff. So that's definitely something to keep in mind as he interviews like guys that don't have a lot of experience. Like the most exciting offensive names are incredibly inexperienced coaches overall. To put it in perspective, as excited as we are about Slowick and Ben Johnson, like Dave Canales has more coaching experience than them. Like Dave Canales is 44. Johnson is 37, 38, and Slowick is 36. So we have to remember, like, Canales has been in this business longer than they have, and he's been exposed to different backgrounds. So, and they haven't listed Canales as a name they've reached out to, and I don't know if they will. Maybe if the playoffs keeps going really well for him, but we know they've already reached out to Slowick and to Johnson, right? So yeah, it's really because John touched on all of this. He touched on the culture, which immediately makes you think guys like potentially Vrabel or Quinn, right? But then he also goes, well, a defensive-minded background, and then he explained how the coordinators shift. But then also when he talks about the offensive-minded guys, he's also talking about, well, can you maintain the culture? Can you lead the group? And it's like, well, they have that going against them, at least superficially. You don't know until they're in the building, right? But it just to me seemed like John's just saying everything to not tip his hand to the media, really, and just like signaling that he's not leaving any stone unturned, because the decision will be scrutinized no matter what.
Yeah. Well, that's Griff. That's the main takeaway, really. Schneider likened this to free agency or the draft. And it really did. It was almost like he was talking about. He said too many is not too many when asked about casting in their nets in the coaching search. He said, we're ready in everything, anybody that you can pretty much think of. So when the Seahawks, it comes out that they've interviewed, so far it's come out that they're planning to interview with. Another thing which came out of this press conference, the interviews start tomorrow. There was some paperwork that Tom Pelissero reported had to be submitted with how it all works. Their vacancy had to be like listed on a certain thing, and so they can begin tomorrow the interviews. But they've already interviewed with Ben Johnson, the Detroit Lions offensive coordinator Bobby Slovic, the Houston offensive coordinator Frank Smith, Miami offensive coordinator Jairo Evero, the Carolina defensive coordinator Patrick Graham, the Las Vegas DC, Raheem Morris, the Rams DC, Mike Kafka, the Giants OC, and Mike McDonald, the Baltimore DC. And there's so many, Dave Canales seems like a pretty obvious one with how well that's all going. I think also there's other names you can think of, which I'm blanking on right now, who you would expect to get interviewed and it come out. So, I mean, in a way, it's like, well, makes sense. This is their chance to get, they need to get the right dude. And Schneider said, when asked about the offensive-minded, defensive-minded, or special teams coach, I think you definitely have to look at the history. You have to look at the different experiences that those individuals have had. But as Griff said, he didn't really commit to a thing. It was interesting hearing him say about how when you hire a defensive coach, your head coach, the OCs, keep getting hired away, and that can be tough on a quarterback. If they're doing well, that is. And then they say, if they hire a great offensive coordinator as the head coach, then how does he get a DC in who's going to be consistent with philosophy, strategy,
right,
and how long is he going to be able to stick around? So, yeah, he said a lot, but really the main takeaway from this coaching search is they're going to do, anyone who I think is in the NFL and is interested. And why I say the NFL is he was asked about college football and he said, I'm not sure yet. We haven't decided that. It's wide open still. There's so much movement in college football. And then he said about how they're far along in the process and it makes it slightly more difficult for those individuals. They have to balance the fact of leaving these young men that they've recruited. But NFL wise, sounds like if you're a half decent coach and you put your application in, you're absolutely welcome to have an interview at least.
Right. We also have to, I think a guiding principle for John is going to be, he's going to hire the best guy that he thinks, but part of his criteria is what he feels is what he feels is more safe. I don't think he's going to take a risk. I don't think he's going to hire the equivalent of Sean McVay on paper, where when the Rams hired McVay, it was a huge risk, because he was such an unknown. But they had a grace period, like Les Snead had a grace period and everything. They had just moved. They weren't cash liquid. He didn't sign a very expensive contract and everything, right? If it doesn't work, you just fire him, right? I think Schneider's on the hot seat just as Pete was. And remember, it's been hinted at that there's a reality where Pete is still the coach right now. And if Pete got the boot and kind of what Pete hinted at in his own final exit press conference, I think John's on the hot seat and he needs to produce results quickly or he's gone too. So I don't know. I think he's going to have lots of trepidation when looking at the younger guys. And I think it's possible that he might look at some guy that has more coaching experience. So that might give Vrabel or Quinn or even McCarthy, if he gets fired, which I would not like, but some more credence. I don't know.
Yeah. Mike McCarthy, that's a name. So Mike McCarthy was raised twice by John Schneider. In his closing statement, he said, when he was talking about how your OC can get hired away, he said, if you go back and look at the 49ers when we hired Coach Mike McCarthy in Green Bay, talking about the Alex Smith situation. He also talked about Mike McCarthy earlier on too. I don't think you should read too much into that. It was a very interesting thing, but he did describe him as the Packers' all-time winningest coach, which is a fact. But
Yeah.
and an incredible, a legendary coach he described him as, along with Mike Holmgren, Marty Schottenheimer, and of course Coach Pete Carroll. So
on that note, though, because he also mentioned Andy Reid. So of the cycle,
Andy Reid's got to go, hasn't he?
what about him? What do you
Oh
mean?
no, they should fire him. Like, it's unacceptable.
Yeah.
They can't put up points on offense anymore.
Right. So, but that said,
And McVay.
Yeah, agreed.
Yep.
Yeah,
sorry.
it's got to go fire.
Yeah.
But so the Andy Reid connection and the coaches that they've been connected to that have a connection to Andy Reid, it's Mike Kafka. So he might give extra consideration to Kafka for that alone, in addition to whatever consideration he was going to give him anyway.
Yeah, and we've heard like really good things about Kafka, haven't we?
Yeah, we have, and I mean, he was kind of touted as like he'll be the Andy Reid successor, and like because it hasn't been Najee, it hasn't been Bieniemy yet. It could be Kafka, and further when McCarthy was hired, McCarthy was 42. So to work against what I just said about Schneider wanting to play it safe, it's like, well, McCarthy was given a chance, right? And he was 42. That's not exactly seasoned, Granted, Kafka's 36, Johnson's 37, 38, like I said, and Slowick is around there too, around that age as well. That's different than 42. Canales is 44. I mean, who knows? We do know that, even though, again, they haven't mentioned Canales, we do know that the Seahawks think really highly of Canales, because there was a report where he was interviewed to be an OC, and they tried to, they give him a pay raise to keep him, and they said that he's a future coordinator, and sure enough, he is.
But now John Schneider controls the coaching hires. But I'm sure he also Griff. I'll be shocked if they don't interview him. Like I said, I think any name is gonna get an interview if they want it.
Yeah.
Now, and it will come out of Canales because he already. I think he kind of reported that he was going for an interview with the Panthers. I think it was on his Instagram. So
interesting.
Right now, the other thing to emphasize here, as John Schneider did in his opening statement and then spoke about later, was how he had been 15 years ago when he was preparing for the moment to be GM. He had 36 pages of coaching material in his big book for Todd Lewicki and Paul Allen, and he had to rip the 36 pages out of there because they'd hired Pete. But the reason he brings that up is he's already kind of been preparing. He's had to do this process before, just without the hire. Now, he described how the difference 15 years ago was there's two differences really, which is sports science and analytics, and the kind of impact they've had in the 15 years since he had to look for a head coach. But this is something that he's probably been quite anxious to be able to do. Kind of what Carroll mentioned in his departing press conference as well. Schneider also revealed he'd spent time with Ron Wolf, the longtime Packers front office man. Spent a lot of time with him on Friday afternoon, and yeah. So, I mean, Griff, not really necessarily a surprise, but easy to forget that how Schneider came into Seattle, and that there is actually work that he's done in the past where he should be well prepared for this.
Yep, absolutely.
And to that point as well, he said, when you work with Pete Carroll, his brain's on fire, so you have to be ready for everything. So for me, the last several years, I've always been ready. If he just decided at one point to, he said to me one day several years ago, Johnny, I'm going to go change the world. And I'm like, I get it, you probably could. So I've always had to be ready. And he said, I've always had to have a list. So
yeah, that is interesting. So
while they'll probably interview with everyone, there's probably like any hiring process. They'll like some names more than others, and I guess we'll find out. But to me, this doesn't come across like it's going to be an immediate decision or even announced this week. I think they're going to let it play out. I think they don't have one name in mind. It's really going to be a competitive interviewing process. And the other factor to this, and I don't think this should be a surprise, like Jody Allen having a directive on who, on what the hiring process should be like, and then Jody Allen saying about, let me find that. But Griff, like she is the Seahawks chair, like.
Yeah.
On how involved Jody Allen would be in the process of hiring the head coach, Schneider said a lot, she's our boss, you have a boss, right? Yeah. That's not a shocker.
Yeah.
Although some people seem to be reacting like that is a shocker and that it's like a meddling owner. But it's not. What do you expect?
Yeah, it sounds pretty normal. Like they all have considerations even outside of football considerations that they'll be screening for and everything, right?
Yeah.
They'll be, yeah.
Where it would be a problem is if, Schneider's number one candidate gets rejected because they've found like a media opinion which is negative about them, which, is given extra weight over, say, all of this work and due diligence that Schneider's put in. But that is getting into real kind of straw man.
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to be the case. And if it were the case, I think Schneider would probably walk. So we'd find out. But yeah, as much as Jody Allen clearly was the one who was like Pete Carroll and Vulcan were the ones who decided to move on from Pete Carroll, as we've covered, this new hiring process. Yeah, obviously the Seahawks chair has the final say because they signed the check. Like,
right.
They pay the check, but. They have to leave this to the football people, and I don't think there's anything to suggest they won't. Right. So with all that kind of addressed, the other thing which came out of this is the Pete Carroll advisor role, which it was a nice sentiment, I guess, kind of a PR positive sentiment. When the departure of the head coach was announced, Schneider was asked by Bob Condotta of the Seattle Times if there was more clarity on Carroll's advisor role, and Schneider answered, "No, there's not. I think it's something that we'll just keep researching in the future, discussing, and seeing how this goes. I mean, how I feel like Jody and Pete got to a great spot, and the organization is very healthy and ready to move forward. So basically, it's not going to happen, is it?"
Yeah. No.
Does that surprise you?
No, I think as soon as Pete realized he wasn't going to stay, his mind is like, I'm out.
Right.
And I'll help John and whatever John needs, but he's gone.
Yeah, and I wonder if there's something like, obviously we don't know the financial details. He had 2024 to run on his contract. They said they came to a amicable thing, didn't they? But, like, what's the payoff? Is there a payoff? He had a 2025 option on his contract. Is there something to paying him off in stages where an advisor role would make sense to make that work? Like, we don't know. But there's probably some financial details where they're not paying Pete off immediately, if they are paying him off at all. It's probably in chunks. I don't know. So we'll probably never know about that. Right. So, chat, what do you want to know? Please do bring your questions and stuff. Griff, on the hiring process, I don't think this name has been raised, but Cameron, thank you so much for the donation, Cameron. What are your guys' thoughts on Raheem Morris? I personally think he'd be a great replacement for Pete Carroll. Elite culture guy, very enthusiastic. Cheers, Cameron, for that donation. Griff?
Yes. What do I think about Raheem Morris?
That's what Cameron asked, buddy.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, it's you when you're hiring Raheem Morris, you're hiring Raheem Morris, right? You're not necessarily hiring a scheme. He's got, like the question said, he's got players love him. It's a culture move, and then tying that in together with what Schneider said, it's how do they put together a staff. That's where you only know what he thinks about that until the interview, right? So if Schneider hires him, I imagine that he probably blew him away with regards to that. And stuff like that. I have no doubt that he's a great leader. Defensively, he has an interesting background. He worked with Dan Quinn, so he knows the Seahawks stuff. And he also has inherited Staley's defense and the Rams and working out of that playbook. So it would be an interesting blend. It would be probably kind of similar to what Clint Hurtt's been doing on paper. That doesn't mean the application or the coaching of it wouldn't be similar, but the actual like X and O's would be, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. So in that sense, it would be interesting if you were to hire a DC to call the plays. Would he just let him run his own defense, or would it be a collaboration? Stuff like that.
I think on to that point, Griff, I would be interested in what Raheem Morris's actual philosophy is, because with the Rams he's been coaching basically a continuation of what Staley was doing with his own twists and fitting to the personnel, which comes off as smart to me. And their defense this year wasn't very good, but they were a very young defense. They were not very talented, and I think they, despite not finishing very good, outperformed the expectations that a lot of people had in the people thought they'd be like 32nd, like talent wise, and there's some young developing players, and just the way he calls plays, there seems to be a cool structure to it and different modes. And obviously in the previous years they had a very good defense with him, and then his exposure to like Dan Quinn stuff with the Falcons, being in Washington from 2012 to 2014, which would have been, who would that have been? I don't even know. But then also Monte Kiffin stuff with the Buccaneers. I mean, he's been coaching in the NFL, despite just being 47, coaching in the NFL since 2002. Obviously had one stint at Kansas State in 2006 as their DC. It'd be interesting to see who the head coach was there. But I think he'll have learned a lot as well from his Buccaneers head coaching stint, where they end up going 3-13, 10-6, missing the playoffs, and then in the third season, he benches a player for an unnecessary roughness penalty, and they go on a massive losing streak and finish the year 4-12, losing the last 10 games of the season. So potentially he lost the locker room. I don't know the exact details behind that, but he'll have learned a lot from that. And if you watch him on the Pivot podcast, he went on there, I think, might have been 2 years ago now, but on there, he just, like Cameron says in their donation, he does seem culturally like a cool dude. He has an energy, a presence, definitely someone who you'd want to interview, even though it hasn't come out that they've interviewed him, but I'm sure they will. So, or they're planning to interview him. Sorry.
I mean, I really thought that the Rams defense would crater this year, like it kind of did the year before. But the fact that it didn't probably speaks to his ability to rally the troops, so to speak, and get guys in the right spots and everything. The 2021, he did have a good defense inheriting Staley. Now it fell from first to like 9th or 10th, but that kind of matched their talent regression. That he still fielded in a well above average defense in 2021. And so we're also talking about him with like a new lens, a fresh start. The Seahawks have more talent on defense than the Rams do right now, for example. So in that sense, like, that would be intriguing. And if he were to get the job, then clearly Schneider would be blown away with what his thoughts were with filling out his staff and how to lead the group and everything, et cetera, right?
Yeah. Right. So thank you, Cameron, for that. Kenny asking, did you guys put your applications in? Griff, mysteriously going off screen for just a second while that question comes in. So kind of shady behavior. Griff, have you heard back from the Seattle Seahawks National Football League organization?
I think I missed the deadline actually, and I don't think they were impressed by that.
Oh, shoot. Yeah. Not yet.
Matty, you should apply.
Yeah, I don't.
Apply
while I'm doing well as a head coach. We had our first practice on Sunday. Very exciting. Nice. I'm drawing up my finalizing my 2024 defensive playbook. But I think NFL head coach, for where I'm at in my career right now, maybe one day. But right now, currently, I'm just ready to compete this season with the O's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Matty, would you like to coach offense one year?
I think it's important to broaden my horizons. Learn about the other side of the football.
I'm not
Pardon?
I'm not interviewing you.
Oh right, yeah. Hell no. Offense is evil.
Yeah, but you also know how to attack the weak spots with your own defense.
Yeah, it's so funny how dumb OCs are as well. They're just like, here's my plays. Yep, gotta get through all my plays. And there's no. That's what a good play caller is. A good play caller. There's no rush to get through all these plays and get their numbers off. There's an art to it. It's not science. Like cooking.
There you go.
Why are we rushing the stew? Let it stew.
Let it stew. There you go. Let it stew, and then baby, you'll have a stew going.
Damn.
All right,
John. Thank you so much. I really enjoy your show, and you deserve all the good things people say about you. That's very kind, John. Cheers.
It's very kind of you, sir. Thank you.
Right, let's have a look at some of these questions, Griff, and then we'll talk about Geno Smith. Wait, have I messed up? Is Raheem Morris the first interview tomorrow? Noah saying.
Yeah, no, he is. He has been.
Well, Griff, correct me, man.
Oh, I didn't know exactly what you meant by that earlier, but yeah, he has been listed.
Yeah. Fact check. Matty doesn't know what he's talking about.
All right. So here's my thing with the defensive coaches. If you hire a defensive coach, I'm not worried about coach drain on the offensive side of the ball so long as you have Geno. Because I think that, if they hire, say they hire Kellen Moore to be the OC, say they hire McDonald or Evero or Morris or Quinn, right? And say the OC's Kellen Moore, say it's Ken Dorsey or Frank Reich, one of these guys that is a good play caller that won't be a head coach. And say it's fireworks and they have a great year and they get hired away, then you just hire the next guy that is going to be a hot shot wanting to be an OC, right? You're always going to attract that. With a veteran quarterback, I'm not worried about the incontinuity there so much. But then, as it relates to, like, if they draft a guy and say Geno's only here for 2 or 3 more years, then yeah, at that point you're going to have to look at that. But if the defensive coach is a good coach, you're going to attract good coordinators. I mean, I don't think Pete didn't attract good OCs. I mean, I'm generally satisfied with some misgivings and some down years, sure. But I'm generally satisfied with the hirings of Bevel, Shoddy, and Waldron. I think they've all been fine. Maybe not like amazing, but like quite good, right? They didn't screw it up anyway, is how I see it. Anyway, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that as it relates to, like?
It's crazy to me how there's no. Well, there are like there's Mike McDonald, but just speaks to how rule changes have ruined the game. But there's all these offensive coaches who are really talented and are up and coming, and it's just so hard to play NFL defense and coach NFL defense and have consistently good years without it just being like, oh, well, he's a pass rush merchant, or he's a D-line merchant, or he needs that blue chip dude. Which again is why we spoke about it, but why Mike McDonald gets mentioned. Pointed out in the chat by Nathan that Mike McDonald hasn't actually, his interview hasn't come out as reported. But as Schneider said when asked if there's coaches still currently coaching in the playoffs that will be included in his search for the team's next head coach. He says, yes, they will be. Obviously, there's certain rules that we'll need to abide by. So, I'd be absolutely stunned if McDonald isn't one of the interviews. Obviously, Ben Johnson came out and the Lions are still in the playoffs, but yeah.
Well, they have submitted a formal request for McDonald.
Right. But I just wish there was more. Oh, okay, thank you, Griff. I wish there was. So he just turned them down. Mike McDonald turns down the Seahawks. No. I wish there was more defensive guys. I think coaching the defensive side of the ball, you generally have to be more. I don't know. Yeah, I think as a DC especially, and maybe it's if you work under offensive head coach, I think generally you have to fit your system more to your players than you do as an offensive guy where you can just come in and run your system, because the way NFL offenses are as well, generally you can plug and play. Not quite. I'm making a very clumsy point, but the basic premise is I think defensive head coaches have to go through more to be good. So the good defensive coaches, I think, are pretty well adjusted and have, especially if they've done it for multiple years. Now, that quesadilla asks, thank you so much for the donation, that quesadilla. That makes me really want a quesadilla. Griff, thoughts on quesadillas?
Yeah, I could go for one right now.
You could?
I could.
You could. Yeah, you actually probably could. And you'd get a much better quesadilla than me, I think.
Yeah.
Like, Washington State, has it got good quesadillas?
Oh, we've got great Mexican food in Washington State. Not as good as like San Diego, which is like the best place on the planet. Well, north of Mexico.
Yep.
Outside of Mexico for Mexican food.
Yep. Yeah. In the UK, we might do somewhere, but generally no. So that quesadilla asks, if Schneider's on the hot seat, it seems that he would be more inclined to hire an experienced head coach. Thoughts? Well, I mean, that quesadilla, he did actually say you have to look at the different experiences that those individuals have had, didn't he? But, I mean, generally, yeah, but I don't know. Really, he just has to hire the right guy who's good, right? And then he'll be okay. So I don't know if experience necessarily equals good, but it certainly helps, as Schneider kind of spoke about. But, like, I don't think this... I mean, remember, when Schneider's pressed in the past, as we've seen from his drafting, he tries to knock it out the park. Right. So this could be a real big swing. And yeah, this press conference, he said so much that he said little, almost. There's little nuggets that we've kind of unpacked, but there's
I see the logic to the question. Like I kind of said the same thing earlier. I think it's possible, but at the same time, this is his only chance to do this. So he's probably going to be true to himself and just do like what he thinks is the best hire. I don't know like if he would risk, even if he had. Does he think in terms of risks, right? Like, even if he had more job security, would he take? I think he'll just hire the guy he's most impressed by and can work the best with, right?
Right, and we talk about experience, but like optics wise, how disappointed as a fan base would you be if they hired Bill Belichick, given where he's at right now, or if they hired Mike McCarthy, who still currently the Dallas Cowboys head coach, but we'll have to see how that happens, or if they hired Dan Quinn, who we saw how that shook out in like the experienced guys who tend to be available are kind of and on Dan Quinn, I think it's worth saying the way his defense lost, and it's kind of annoying me, but the way his defense lost against the Packers was they couldn't play man coverage. Like, they were trying to play man coverage, and they couldn't play man coverage, and it wasn't exactly Calvin Johnson or Julio Jones out there. It was Romeo Dobbs,
I think it's pronounced.
Romeo Dobbs, and Stephon Gilmore just had a kind of game where you're like, we should probably move on from him in the offseason and get better at corner. They've been getting away with their corner talent, and people have really kind of spoken highly about how Dan Quinn's got those guys playing. But that game, they just collapsed. Along with they couldn't stop the run, and then suddenly everyone's like, they're so light. Why are they using safeties at linebacker? Well, they're not, but
right.
It's just a bad game that any defense can have when you your offense doesn't do much and you get out executed, and that's what man coverage is. Like, guys are still one-on-one with post safety help. Like, what do you expect?
If you hire Dan Quinn, I actually have like zero qualms about the offense. If you hire Dan Quinn, he's going to get you a good coordinator. I think I'm pretty like confident about that. I think we should be confident about that if it is Quinn. I know Quinn doesn't excite a lot of people. Furthermore, on defense, if they keep Brooks, I'm actually intrigued about the defense. I mean, he got the Cowboys. Like, I mean, they're the best defense for the last 3 years if you combine all 3 years. I know like the playoff game was bad and stuff, but he's had attrition in the wrong spots, and he couldn't coach through it. But he hasn't had like hook play, and he still plays a bunch of cover 3 in spite of all the changes he's made, or tweaks really. He still plays a bunch of cover 3. I would actually be intrigued by him with some skepticism, but I'd be intrigued with him if they keep Brooks and what he would do and how he'd piece together his defense. It would open things up. Like, there are some things he can't do in Dallas that Seattle can do or has been able to do because of Brooks. So I would be open-minded to it. I think like superficially though, like McDonald would be a better hire, at least just because with McDonald, we're talking about a year and a half of good defense, right? A year and a half. And the other half bad defense.
Do you weigh his time in college football as well? Obviously, 2021 Michigan defensive coordinator. They were a pretty interesting unit. They did a few interesting things, right?
Yeah, no, they certainly did. But then he left, and his replacement, Jesse Minter, is just as good, at least with that defense, right?
Yeah, and that raises the question, like, what even is that? How do you describe that system? Just like they play quarters. They split. They have a pretty even split between cover 1, cover 3, and quarters. It's like 20 to 30% of all 3. And they backfill. They play like 15% cover 6 and stuff. I think the philosophy of it is how they weave in and out of each call, really. Their willingness to send pressure, but that for me, I think, is them just saying like, let's just use Roquan Smith, let's just use Patrick Queen. But like, I'd need to dive into it more. Is it like a Raven, like an old Ravens thing, which is then built upon by evolving from Don Brown? Like, where does it come from?
I think it goes back to like Greg Williams, I think is what it is.
Okay.
Like Rex Ryan, Rob Ryan, Greg Williams type stuff, but like the 4-down version of it for the most. Well, but he's also front versatile. I think principle wise, what he does is he attacks protections, and he likes to double the number 1 receiver in some way, and that's like everything else is built around that principle.
Yeah.
Now, if he had a 4-man rush, would he send as much replacement pressures and stuff, right?
And when you say the number 1 receiver, the most dangerous offensive receiver,
when the Ravens played the Seahawks, they played cover 3, and their cover 3 like replacement fire zones, and then they played a bunch of cover 2 to DK's side, whether it was cover 2 on both sides or cover 4 on the other side changed. That's pretty much what they did, and it was one of his more simple game plans. Because it was just that principle of like, make sure we keep double coverage on DK, and then make sure we work the weak side of the protection, or the back side of the protection rather, and get those free hitters there with the occasional like slot blitz to the strong side to get an overload. And I think it's more like he's water, like he can be different things week to week. But the thing I'm most impressed by, really, with all of it, because like the Seahawks send quite a bit of sim pressures too. Thing I was most impressed by is just everyone is really well coached, and we can't lose sight of that. Like, when they just play spot drop cover 3, which they do occasionally, the hook drops are good. The buzz drops are good. The corners are overlapping when there's two is up the seam. Like the free safety melts in the right directions based off what the quarterback is doing. They're just well coached is really the secret sauce. And like they do have good players. They have a very good secondary. Roquan Smith they don't put as much on Queen's shoulders as they do Roquan, because Roquan can do all that hard stuff. I think if again they keep Jordan Brooks, he's going to be like, why can't Jordan do anything Roquan can do? And honestly, watching each of their tape, like in 2021 in coverage, I was way more impressed with Jordan Brooks than I was Roquan Smith. I remember watching Roquan Smith for Chicago. I'm like, Brooks does all this stuff and he does some of it better. I do think Roquan's had his best years in football. He was really good in Chicago, but he's had his best years in Baltimore.
Yeah, he was insane, but I think there's just kind of a system thing going on maybe there as well.
Yeah,
like anyway. They're maximizing him, which that's kind of the theme of that whole defense. They seem to be really good at maximizing where each player.
He has the schematic pivot points. He has the mic that opens up your coverage menu. He has the nickel and Devin, which the different skill set is Kyle Hamilton, but he loves to use the nickel to open up his defense, right? So you have that in Devin. You've got Devin out on the outside when you need to be in base. And then you've also got Tariq Woolen. Those are huge selling points. And then talent-wise, the Seahawks' talent on the D-line is not that far away from the Ravens. You might even argue it's equal. You bring back Leonard Williams, bring back Nwosu, you get year 2 out of your call, and you draft.
They have to bring back Jordan Brooks, Griff.
Yeah, it's a lot of if and buts here, but the way John was talking, I think he values Jordan.
And that brings us nicely to. He described, as you said, 2023 as an underachievement, Griff, but he also said how he thought very highly about this team, which he should, because he put this roster together. He's been building this roster, but he said it's a young, talented team that feels like they're right on the cusp. I should have probably mentioned that earlier. So he's feeling bullish, and he's clearly in that mindset of probably restocking, replenishing, we're going for it. There's not going to be a tanking type year for Seattle, and again, if Schneider's feeling a bit pressed still, then he can't afford that either. But just extra confirmation of that. Now, one name, Griff, that we've heard a lot about is Adam Schefter reported it, but also we've heard separately noise and buzz about this, is Mike Vrabel, who apparently has some type of relationship with John Schneider. I don't know when that would have been, but they probably, back in the day, scouted him as a prospect, coming out of Ohio State. Yeah. But Vrabel, who's obviously been fired as the Titans head coach, in his first 4 seasons, he had winning records, including 2020, 11-5, 2021, 12-5. Then the last 2 years, he's gone 7-10, 6-11. There's obviously a lot to unpack there. He lost Arthur Smith, his offensive coordinator, from after the 2020 season. And then they traded AJ Brown and kind of haphazardly acquired or drafted Treylon Burks, which hasn't really worked. They got weird at quarterback, took Malik Willis, and who just didn't look playable, and then took Will Levis. Their offensive line this year was an abomination. It just felt so far away from Vrabel. He did win AP Coach of the Year after that, and many Coach of the Year awards after that 12-5 2021 season. I think, Griff, how do you feel about Mike Vrabel?
Well, we do know also, when you talked about those roster decisions the Titans have made, the past 2 years, they wrestled control away from him with their GM switch, and supposedly Vrabel had very little control in the building. Yeah. And the relationship got really bad there.
And yeah, I really don't think he was on board with the AJ Brown thing. Like when that came out,
No.
he seemed very annoyed.
And it's strange because AJ Brown was perfect for their offense, and then further Traylon Brown or Traylon
Burks.
is like nowhere near to what they need. He's like the antithesis of how that offense works. But like he hired LaFleur, he hired Arthur Smith, both two very good OCs, right? Obviously, Arthur hasn't been as good of a head coach, but his offense is, I like his offense quite a bit on paper anyway. Same with LaFleur, and LaFleur has lived in different worlds too. So I think Vrabel has an eye for understanding like how important the staff is. Again, that's something Schneider keeps emphasizing. That's the main thing Schneider has emphasized, that links all the when you listed pros and cons for any type of background of coach, the one thing that links all three of what he's wanting is how they fill their staff out. Or obviously he'll have final say over staff decisions, but the fact that he's suggesting that how they fill their staff suggests that it would be like a process that they work on together.
Yeah, and he said, in his last sentence, basically, in his press conference today, he said, staff development and procurement, I think that's extremely important, regardless of if it's an offensive guy, defensive guy, special teams guy. And that's the stuff that when the Seahawks were damn good, and it tends to correlate with, winning records, right? Because there's success on both sides of the ball. But they had a lot of guys hired away. That slowly kind of dwindled. I mean, Canales went, but the rest of guys actually getting hired away from Seattle rather than just fired and finding another job just didn't happen towards the end. So that's a very good point, Griff. The thing with Vrabel as well, he seems to be a guy who players love. I think I described it maybe as a culture shock from Pete, but I don't know. Maybe he'd be able to blend it. Maybe he's not. I think his success shows he didn't do what other Belichick disciples did, where they're just an asshole, and they're like, I'm going to be even more Belichick than Belichick. He clearly had his own way of doing it, and I don't know, listening to how Will Compton has described Vrabel and team meetings and stuff is it. He's a football guy, and I think it clearly gets players to buy in. I mean, even this season they were playing scrappy. They didn't quit. They were just bad. They had no talent at all.
Yeah. You could see it. They all played with their hair on fire. They just weren't good, but they played hard. Right.
So I mean, defensively, I don't know if Vrabel even has he doesn't. From what we've heard about him, he's not really into the kind of scheme or necessarily into the big front office decisions. He's more kind of that culture, buy-in.
He's managing a work week is what he does.
Right.
He's managing personnel. That's really what head coaching is. Unless you're an active play caller, you're literally getting performance reviews, how are getting guys to scheduling the day, how did you do this, report to me, what that's what it is. It's making sure the coordinators are doing their job, but letting the coordinators do their job. That's kind of what Vrabel is. So that can work. The Titans have had 2 years of decent defense under him. His year as a coordinator with Houston did not go well at all, at least statistically. I don't know how he got a head coaching job off of that. He must have just interviewed really well, and because there was a lot of hype, I remember, when he was in Houston.
Well, didn't he have a connection with John Robinson as well, the GM? He was with the Pats, right? So
could have, yeah.
I think that's kind of helps, but yeah. So that is a real name to monitor based on what we're hearing, publicly and also behind closed doors. I don't know how to. The only thing I'd say is, how do you sell that as optics wise, coming off 2 losing seasons in a row, whatever the context. Right. He went to the AFC Championship in that 2021 year, losing to the Kansas City Chiefs, who obviously won the whole thing that year. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I don't hate it, but
I mean firing. Well, we keep saying firing. We have to put qualifiers on that. Moving on from Pete for a 9-win season to then hire Vrabel, who won 5, that Pete also beat.
Right, and Pete still had his team playing hard. Like, they were playing hard, they were just making the same mistakes and doing some stupid stuff.
Right. So superficially, it's like that's a weird sell, right? So I don't know. Like, I don't know how ownership would feel about that, but maybe they're giving some deference to John. It's like, all right, well, it's your ass if it doesn't work, right? I don't know. It can work. I mean, really, like, the offense has so much potential in it right now. And so does, I mean, the offense has like proven potential, like not theoretical potential. Like, the O-line simply normalizes. You're talking about, with a competent play caller, a top 7 offense. Because they're already 10th with like the 29th ranked offensive line. You can only imagine how much they improve from 10th on if the O-line can simply approach average, which you don't even need to do necessarily with like roster turnover. Defensively, the one thing I think we can agree on is that there's a lot of talent in the secondary, and the defensive line is at least the best defensive line the Seahawks have had on paper since 2017. I mean, there's a lot of investment there. Chetan Nwosu's making $18 million a year, so is Draymond Jones. If you bring back Leonard Williams, Jaron Reed has another year on his deal. He just had one of the best years of his career. And then you're looking at a year or 2 from Derek Hall, which could be something. And you could still draft someone at 16 at D-line. You have the potential here of putting forth one of your most talented defensive rosters in a while. Vrabel's, I think we could view him as a stabilizer. Vrabel getting everyone working to their potential with 2 good coordinator hires. This team can do a lot of damage in theory, right? In theory. But I think that's the argument for someone like Vrabel and Quinn.
Do you think he'd be scheme, like, not even that bothered about the defensive scheme? Or do you think he'd want some input there? It'd be really interesting to see what coordinator he hired and what kind of system they ran, right?
Yeah. No, the thing with him, agreed. I could see him being open-minded. I mean, the Titans veer a little bit from like pure Belichick. Like, they're not playing, like, I think they're doing more split field stuff. They're not as much cover 1. Bill loves to play cover 1. Offensively, though, that's where I wonder. Seahawks fans might be really frustrated with him. LaFleur passes a lot in Green Bay. Actually, not as much as people think. He's actually more balanced. But
no,
more
and watching that offense is very evident how the running game is impactful.
Right? But still, it's like Green Bay is like just north of average with their pass rates, right? LaFleur is. Arthur Smith is running the ball, passing the ball like 45% of the time. Mm-hmm. So he's way at the bottom. So what is it? But so were the Titans when LaFleur was there. So is that Vrabel being like, shorten the game, control the clock. We want as few drives as possible. That's how I like to coach. I don't know. So people might find Vrabel frustrating for that.
We've got a question here from Tommy saying, do these guys fit if we go back to 4-3? I'd say right now, with how the roster is constructed, they're very well situated to be a base 4-3 or a base 3-4. The only thing with the 4-3 thing is they probably lack a big edge or 2, but that's something you can correct very quickly in the draft or free agency. They're running a pretty hybrid scheme this year, even though, you can call it a base 3-4 personnel. Like, they kind of fit everything. The only thing I would say is they're very much in a kind of 1-gap mindset. They don't really have any 2-gapping types. But again, I think that's something, if the front office knows what they're doing and there isn't the same type of lag that we've seen from them in acquiring defensive personnel for the system over the past 2-3 years, then they should be able to get guys who can do that a bit. But also, there's going to be new coaches for them as well.
Right.
Right, we've got a donation from Matt. Thank you, Matt, saying, aren't there a lot more options to get a high-quality defensive coordinator on an offensive coach's staff than the other way around?
Honestly, right now, I think it's the other way around. I don't know, like, the best DC names are, like Ejiro Evero is probably going to either stay put or get a head coaching job, which I'm down for that. Him at head coach, I would embrace that. I'd be like, all right, let's go. Let's see what happens. Other than that, the only like DCs floating around right now that I can think of that makes sense is like Staley. And I think if Staley's only defense, then like, okay, that can work. I'll give it a shot, right? Other than that, there are not many hot names that are looking to be upgraded from like passing game coordinator or position coach to be a DC right now. I mean, there's Mark Manuel. I mean, I would be content with Chris Richard. Probably not going to happen, right? But
Joe Witt
beyond
Jr.
that, Joe Witt Jr. I mean, but he's going to follow Dan Quinn, right?
Mm-hmm.
So beyond that, it's like there are like 4 or 5 offensive names that are going to be a head coach, but after that, there's like 5 to 10 more OCs right now that are worthy of being an offensive coordinator and play caller. I mean, like Ken Dorsey is going to be like highly coveted. I know he got fired, but he shouldn't have been. The Bills fired their OC when they were like the 3rd ranked offense. Like,
that same sparsity of names.
I mean, Kellen Moore is going to get a lot of looks.
He's not a coach. The same supply and demand thing for when it comes to a defensive head coach or offensive head coach, to me, still applies, and to Griff as well, from what it sounds like. It still applies to the coordinator positions. Like, there isn't really as many obvious, like, high-quality DCs than there are, guys who... you'd think about as OCs, I'd say. Now, I get your point in that, well, the high-quality OCs are probably eligible to get promoted to head coach now, and they're not going to take a job elsewhere, but I know the production line, I think it's a bit more obvious.
Yeah.
David Crockett, thank you, David. Thoughts on the Philadelphia Eagles head coach, Nick Sirianni, if he is fired?
I can't stand Sirianni.
What does he do?
He doesn't do anything, man. And plus Steichen was the real brains behind Hurts, like, coming alive and everything. And anytime Steichen or anytime Sirianni gets involved, it's not good.
And he's kind of got the double-edged sword of he's managed, from my perception, and also what I've heard from people who cover the Eagles, is he manages to kind of deflect blame very well, and he's like the overseer, but it's always the coordinator's problem. But then that also becomes an issue when you're like, well, hang on a sec, we know who was doing this and we know who's doing that, but other than being that kind of like what positive impact has he had on the team? Now we're out the playoffs and we look like absolute crap and lost so many games. Is it lost 5 of the last 6 or 6 of the last 7?
Something like 6 of the last 7, including the playoffs.
Yeah, nuts. After starting 10-1, like what are we doing here? So yeah, I that seems very counterintuitive, and I mean, maybe he had a cool culture in Philadelphia. I don't really know, but just vibes wise, it seems like whoa. It'd be a bit of a shock. Right. Yeah. So, Griff, finally, we have John Schneider was asked right towards the end of his presser his thoughts on Geno Smith's season. He said, I think Geno had a good season. It was a little bit opposite of last year. He started out really strong last year, and things dipped a little bit in the second half. This year, he started out not quite as strong as last year, and then finished in a real strong manner. Thoughts?
I mean, he doesn't give anything beyond that. He just answers the question point blank, right? Which is what I think anyone would agree with. He doesn't say, like, he doesn't give any hint of, like, we love Geno. He doesn't give any hint of, like, we're moving on from him or anything. I think he wants to keep that open-ended to signal to any prospective coach that, like, we don't, like, what's your opinion on Geno? Like, he doesn't want to send someone away by giving them an answer like, we don't want him, and they did want him, or the opposite, right? I don't know. And I'm surprised there weren't follow-up questions. It's like, do you view him as...
Yeah, and I think right, to defend the beat, I think that there was a bit of a last question type of announcement from the team PR. So they were running out of time. Yeah, it makes sense for him to, his quarterback is an asset whether he's on the team or they trade him. Like there's no reason to unnecessarily bash Gino. I think that's a fair assessment of like just his raw numbers, right? Like it's clear to everyone.
Yeah.
How he actually feels about Gino is interesting. Like, who was the bigger believer in Geno Smith out of Pete Carroll and John Schneider? They both could just be believers, and that's enough. But while Schneider has the final say on personnel, it will be interesting in how that shakes out. And I mean, with what we've heard and stuff, and then Schneider, he rightly pointed out about the offensive coach and how that impacts the quarterback if you have a defensive guy and the OC keeps getting hired away. But that kind of extra applies to a young quarterback, doesn't it? So, and Gino is 33. They have a kind of decision to make when it comes to his contract. You could say, possibly not, but it does point towards that. Maybe they do draft a guy. I saw on Seahawks Reddit there was rumors about which got deleted. Rumors about new jerseys in 2024, Griff.
Yeah, I saw that.
Are they gearing towards jersey sales and getting? I don't know, but
Might.
yeah, it's yeah. He didn't really say much, but it's just, I mean, it's cool to hear the GM say that assessment, I guess. Finished in a real strong manner, but it's pretty non-committal, isn't it?
Yeah. It's really just like a superficial point-blank answer, isn't it?
The question I'd have asked is, how did you construct an offensive line that gave up over 40% pressures percentage on all passes for a pocket QB?
Right. Exactly. And then you might even say, are you impressed that you guys had the 10th ranked passing offense in spite of that? Wait, why did you fire the coaching staff again, Jody? You might ask that. You also might not. See, that's the thing. If they hire an offensive mind, Slovic or Johnson or Canales even, I think those would be good hires because they're good play callers. But I don't know why I'm supposed to be excited about them relative to Waldron, and that's my hot take. Superficially, the Seahawks right now have a better offense than the Houston Texans did. And, if you were to say Waldron's better than Slovic point blank, they'd say you're crazy. But then if you also say a lot of those people, Geno's better than Stroud or about equal, they also say you're crazy. And the Texans have a good offensive line, and that's good receivers.
I mean, we don't even need to get in the weeds about watch that playoff game. Look how clean Stroud is, and look how open and that's not to denigrate how well he's playing football and how quick his release is and how cool it all looks. And he looks like a really exciting player.
Go ahead.
Well, it's just to kind of re-emphasize that the Seahawks offensive line killed
a lot of offense, a lot of what they were trying to do, and I think 80% of that is injury. But so if they still
not 80, surely not 80%.
Why should I go higher?
No, I think 60, 65, 70.
I mean, whatever their potential was completely tanked by the amount of injury they had. I think Bradford, the carousel with Bradford at right guard, no problem. Damian Lewis being out for a game or two, like Cross being out for 3 games, coming back not the same. Kind of found his footing here and there, and then the right tackle situation was just a mess. But anyway, I guess what I'm saying is, bringing in Slovic or Johnson or whatever as play callers, as scheme goes, you're just getting back to neutral relative to Waldron. And if anything, based off of how Seahawks fans talk every Sunday, you're going to hate Slovic. Learn to hate him. He uses not as much motion as Waldron does. He runs the ball way more than he does. And that's not because D'Amico Ryans is the head coach, whose defensive background. Slovic comes from the 49ers. During his time in San Francisco from 2017 to 2022, the 49ers are running the ball the third highest rate in the league. Slovic believes in the run game. He believes in the run game more than Pete Carroll does. So if they hire Slovic, the play action is going to be great. yeah, the drop back game will be efficient, but prepare to watch a lot of run pass sequences. That's what you're getting with him. Ben Johnson too. Ben Johnson runs the ball way more than Shane Waldron does. So it's just like that's what we're opening ourselves up to. Also, the Lions have a top 5 O-line. They're the 7th ranked offense in the league. The Seahawks had a bottom 3 ranked O-line. They're the 10th ranked offense. So I'm just saying, in terms of like marginal value increase here, play calling wise, you were not getting something much better than what the Seahawks already had. Shane Waldron was already checking off a lot of boxes. That doesn't mean there weren't issues. There were. I'm just saying that they don't add up to being that much worse than or better than what Slovic and Johnson are going to give you. That said, they could be great head coaches because you're not just hiring a play caller. They might be excellent leaders of individuals and stuff and running the ship and really value who they bring in at DC, right? Great for the culture, et cetera. Hire them on that count, but don't hire them thinking like they're going to unlock something we've never seen, because Pete Carroll wouldn't ever let his coordinators do, or Pete Carroll would never hire an OC like that. I just think that is misguided thinking.
Yeah. And maybe there's that. I mean, obviously the dream is like you get like for the offensive product, you get like a Shanahan or a McVay, and those two are very different in some ways, right? But
right,
you just don't know. That's like the dream of an OC as head coach type of hire, or you can end up with Arthur Smith, like who.
Right.
Anyway, who, by the way, he could come with Preamble, Griff.
Hell, I mean, that would be fine with me. I mean, Arthur Smith looks at Geno Smith and just go, "We had the 3rd best passing offense with Ryan Tannehill for 2.5 seasons. I'm gonna have it with you too."
DK Metcalf, run that dig, buddy.
No, that's the thing. Now the offense, okay, that's what we got to talk about. Slovic is not copy pasting his route concepts in Houston to here. You have DK Metcalf. Shane Waldron came from the Rams. He's the same background. He runs a different offense when we have DK Metcalf on the team. Ben Johnson is going to run a very different offense with DK Metcalf on the team. It's going to be he's not going over the middle with DK Metcalf, man. I mean, he'll run the occasional dig route like he did with Shane, but like Shane came with like the most dig route heavy offense in the league. It's not happening with DK Metcalf being your number 1. To Jackson, yes. To Tyler, maybe not Tyler because he doesn't want to take those hits anymore. But like it's going to look different. So I don't know. It's just it's going to be, and that's what good coaching staffs do. They build around their players, right? There are going to be a lot of principles that overlap, right? There's going to be some staples, but like the main principle of the offense is going to be leveraging DK's verticality against the defense to affect their structure. I mean, it's not going to look that different.
So really, what this head coaching, and that part of that's why, from what we hear, Pete Carroll was so reluctant to fire both coordinators, which is what we've heard, and we heard from again multiple people is kind of the hang up with. Why he went, and there may have been a future for him if he'd decided to do it. But really, the head coach hire is going to the real upgrade. They'd hope would be on the defensive side of the ball, where the play caller just didn't seem to have it in Clint Hurt, and this year they'll be expecting with how Schneider views his roster and what he's put together, he'll be expecting like a leap from. And it's a big leap. Like it requires a lot of stuff to go well. But from, whatever they were, 29th, 32nd, depends what you look at, to like 15th at least.
Yeah. Right.
Right. Now, I had something else to talk about. Well, I just wanted to make the point. Schneider said about not being stagnant and that sort of stuff. But, it's easy to be like, oh, he's talking about Pete Carroll, how that was stagnant. But no, he said
He's taking accountability.
He's taking accountability, and he said, "We always talk about coming to work every day and knowing what kind of influence you're going to have on the organisation. That's what makes a great culture. Pete and I are very proud of the culture that we established here. I think the thought of everybody looking in the mirror, that's what that means, and that's what every individual in the organisation. So they want to just build on what they've got, basically."
Yeah, and then he also said, I think he's saying that signaling to ownership, it's like, yeah, we're trying to be better than we've been, right? Because given the nature of the dynamics and everything, if he supposedly is on the hot seat, and then he also followed up with saying maybe stagnate was the wrong word, and just trying to improve for the sake of it, which is the same language Pete would always say.
Mm-hmm.
Because if he was calling out Pete, it's like, oh, now he's dodging accountability now. What does that say about trying to move forward, and running this thing, So I mean, that would be like trying to take pressure off of himself, and I don't think that would go well with anybody, including Jody, because it's like Jody and Bert and everyone, Chuck Arnold, are going to be like, you were a part of that too, right? Or weren't you? So it's just, I mean, really, it's a nothing quote in my view. And a lot of this was really nothing.
Yeah,
I mean, it was him like checking every box.
So come on.
Yeah.
But we did get, we know what his role is now. We got a comment on Geno Smith. We know that they're gonna do talk to a lot of head coaches where that it wasn't an absolute certainty, and we know they're wanting to continue the culture that they had. That's basically what we got out of it. So I think that's a pretty effective. I mean, pat ourselves on the back, why don't we? But I think that's a pretty effective wrap up, Griff. I think we've summarised that well. Chat, let us know if you've got any other questions for us. Also in the news today, Jed Fish, who was a name we talked about as the Seahawks head coach candidate, possibly. He was unveiled as the Washington Huskies' new head coach after Kalen DeBoer left for the University of Alabama. And Fish happened to hold his press conference at the exact same time as John Schneider. But what came out was he said how Pete Carroll is going to be a mentor close by and ready to help. So
whatever that means.
I don't know what that means. Is that the same type of advisor role as the Seahawks? Probably not. But mentor, I think it's more like he'll be able to talk to him and Carroll will be there. I don't think it's an official position.
Do you think Pete takes a head coaching job this year?
Huh.
What does your gut tell you?
No.
I
think he's a what did he say in his end of season his last press conference? Wade every river, hike every mountain, do something else. He loves fishing. Did you know that?
I did not know that Pete's a fish.
Yeah, he loves going fly fishing or something.
Really?
Yeah.
It was like surfboards only.
No, well, I imagine there will be some surfing involved. Yeah.
Yeah.
He always wears those. What's the brand of like sunglasses? I think it's Hawaiian.
Tony Bahama or something.
Yeah. No. Is it Tim? Someone? I don't know. Yeah. Kind of surf vibes. Anyway. Right. Well, chat, if you haven't got anything, this was your chance. This is your chance to keep us here for longer. Please do like the video. Matt, it's not Oakley. It's like, trust me, I looked it up one time. It's expensive. Not that I wanted to wear the exact same sunglasses as Pete Carroll. That would be weird. Cameron, don't mess this up. Don't mess this up, Cameron. Yes, this is it. Corey, I think it's Maui Jim. I think that's the sunglasses. I'd never heard of them before.
Cam, what's your question?
Oh, wow.
That'll probably be a thing.
Cameron asks, how much should game management, fourth down decisions weigh in this coaching search? And of course, Schneider at the start, near the start of his presser, he mentioned the two changes of sports science and then analytics, and saying how also after that point, saying how the strategy is the same, although there is the kind of analytics aspect that in the past 15 years has really kind of got more and more involved. So, yeah, it's going to be a big thing, I think. How much should it? Is that where I've lost it now? How much should it? Well, yeah, that's like how you win games, right? But
Right, yeah.
fourth down decisions, to me is always it's a bit flawed. Like, it's cool to look at, but there's a lot of
Also, I think there's a lot more to game management than how you use your timeouts and fourth downs and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's stuff that we can't see, but it's how you communicate with your staff.
Yeah. So from the outside looking in, like when even hiring a guy, when you get to interview them, it's very hard to assess those things. And I think you can get too caught up in the ways that are like the very basic ways of assessing them.
Right.
But when Pete Carroll spoke about, like, I mean, even this season when he spoke about fourth downs and like what happens if you don't get them and the impact of that, it really just I found it slightly jarring because it's like Pete's such a positive guy in every other aspect, and yet his kind of view on going for it on fourth down, I mean, it wasn't as negative as people paint out, but
yeah.
Go ahead, Griff.
No, I cut you off totally. Go ahead.
Well, his just reason for not doing it more came off as uncharacteristically negative, but it's also a kind of defensive mindset. And he definitely believes in kind of momentum and the psychological parts of football. So
right, he did go for it more last year, and then he started off doing it again this year, and then he kind of was more conservative toward the end.
That 4th and 1 against, was it the Steelers, where they didn't get the DJ Dallas push out?
And they're a good short yardage third down running team, so that is peculiar.
He just thought they could play defense.
Yeah, and I don't blame them because they should have been able to play defense that game. Like I would have had the same mindset if I was in his shoes, especially after you got your act together in the second half with the Titans,
and that's game management and game planning really, because the fourth down decisions, because essentially you go for more fourth down decisions if you think your defense is going to struggle, or you think this is how a coach thinks, or you think your offense is not going to be able to get down the field that often or put drives together. So when you're in fourth and short, let's keep the drive alive because it's a good defense we're against and we might not get the opportunity again. There's a lot more into it than just kind of that thing. But and I think we need a slightly better way of assessing that. I don't think it exists though because there's too much context involved. So it's like a cool stat to look at, but
right. Matty, what is your what does your gut tell you? Do you think they go offense or defense?
Well. Who's like a vibey guy? Who's like pure vibes coach they could get?
What do you mean? Like the coach exhibits vibes, or like?
Yeah, the coach exhibits vibes, good vibes, energy.
Dude, you know who probably makes everyone feel like $1 million being in the same room with him? That's why people in the industry like him so much. Is Dan Quinn. Forget about what his background is. People like being around Dan Quinn, and all of his players love him. His staff members love him. Everyone loves Dan Quinn.
Yeah.
Whether or not he's a good coach, whether or not he'd be a good hire is a separate question from the fact that people fucking love being in the same room with Dan Quinn.
And Brian Schottenheimer.
People love Brian Schottenheimer. That's the other thing. Like vibes-wise, like Brian, like you kick back with Brian. So
because there was was it the NFL Player Association like polled their members of like the best coordinators, and the Cowboys had Shotty as the number one DC OC and Quinn as the number one DC. Was it the NFLPA?
Yeah, players love those guys. So, yeah, I mean Quinn will probably knock his interviews out of the park just because that's what he does, right? I think it will be. I don't think McDonald comes to Seattle, even if they wanted him. I think he goes. I think he's probably stays. He's been in the East Coast his whole life. I think Seattle values Quinn a lot in the sense that like you don't have to like the onboarding process would be really simple, the working relationship.
That's one thing I wish Schneider was asked, Griff. Like Pete Carroll said in his end of season press conference, his last press conference, the marriage is so important, like the relationship, like you really have to get along. They should have asked him, like, a question along those lines.
That is something really working for Quinn. Otherwise, I think Schneider views youth maybe as a positive because then he can kind of like steer them more. Slovic being like under 40 years old,
right, and it's their first experience, so they don't really know what they are getting into necessarily, like what, or they don't have prior stuff to lean on. So, like you said, you can mold them.
And like Slovic has good vibes. Like his press conferences, he's upbeat, he's positive, he's very forthright and like very confident. I think Johnson is too, but Slovic might give more like he might give off more of a confident air, maybe. Mm-hmm. But again, it's like it's hard to gauge like how do you run a team, right? I don't know. I feel like what the offense isn't going to be any better or worse if Kellen Moore or Ken Dorsey's calling plays or Slovic or Ben Johnson's calling plays, in my opinion. You're not getting anything more out of your offense. At that point, it's how is the team being ran, and is everyone like game, right? Is everyone geared up to play? And I do think Dan Quinn's a motivator. I do think he is. I think Vrabel's a motivator. I don't know, man. I feel like, Johnson and Slovic just like meet a threshold of like goodness, and they have a threshold of goodness at QB too, at Goff and Stroud respectively, and that's what you get. You get a top 10 offense, except in Houston's case, you get the 15th ranked offense. But Stroud's a rookie, right? So they've got young receivers, really good receivers, but young.
And they haven't been able to run the ball that well generally.
No. In fact, the only two teams of all. Okay, so Tampa Bay, Detroit, Houston, Seattle. Of all those teams that I just mentioned, it's just Detroit and Seattle that has a competent run game. Detroit is firmly good, like 7th. Seattle's like 13th.
And I'd be interested with Seattle's run game in like their bust percentage.
It's really, it's very much, there's a disparity for sure.
Right. And then like, would they have done it more if they'd been able to have like a more like reliable, like, less negative play rushing offense? Like probably, like it felt like they got away from it when they felt it wasn't going to be efficient.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely not what you want it to be, but I'm just saying to put our misgivings about the Seahawks run game in context, it's better than the Bucs. It's better than the Texans, right? And it's not like the Texans have a bad O-line. Maybe they're not good run blockers, but they are good protectors. So I don't know, man. I feel like it's either offense or Quinn. I don't think it's going to be Evero or McDonald at DC or a former D coordinator to be the head coach. So Quinn, so long as Kellen Moore, or Ken Dorsey, or even Frank Reich, or even Arthur Smith is calling plays, I'm not worried. Gino will take care of the rest. Personally,
does Dan Quinn have a big game problem? That's what will get asked if they do go that way. One guy who's been asked about in the chat is Frank Smith, who was like one of the first names to come out, and I don't know if you can call it more surprising, but he's young. He's 42. What?
Never called plays though.
Yeah. So it's like An interesting one. I mean, he called plays at Butler. Griff, are you familiar with Butler?
I'm not familiar with Butler.
FCS, the Butler Bulldogs. He was their 2006 O-line coach, and then 2007 to 2009, the OC and O-line coach. Was O-line coach in New Orleans for 4 years, then Chicago Bears tight end coach for 2 years, then 2 years with the Raiders as the tight ends coach, and then so he's been in and around different offenses. Chargers run game coordinator and O-line coach in 2021. And then with the Miami Dolphins, the past 2 years as their OC, but not calling the plays.
Yep.
Seems like a very big elevation, I'd say. But I don't know anything really about him because he didn't call plays, but it's cool that he's been in and around, I mean, Shanahan, if you call this McDonald offense that, very different quarterback to with Tua than the Chargers in 2021, right? Who had Herbert.
And what is his pass game like? Is what you want to.
Right, and then with the Raiders when Gruden was there, so it's interesting.
That's overlap with good systems and everything. It's just like, is he just going to play the hits when it comes to calling drop back instead of not really tying it well?
Experience with Sean Payton. Who was the Bears' offensive mind in 2015? Is that
Najee? No, not yet.
No.
Wait, was Lovie Smith still there in 2015?
I was thinking it was Trestman, but he went in 2014. John Fox was the head coach. Jeez.
John Fox.
That's crazy. They had it tough.
Yeah.
Chat, get in touch if you know who the Chicago Bears offensive coordinator was in 2015. That's a deep pull. Adam Gase. Wow. There you go.
All right.
Right. Please do like the video. Follow Griff on Twitter at CMikeSpinMove. Follow me at Matty F. Brown. It also really helps us if you give us a 5-star review on your podcast app because it gets people listening. Then they realize it's also a show on YouTube where you can participate in the live chat. Follow the pod at Seattle Overload to find out when we're going live or around when we're going live. Thank you so much, Cameron, Kenny, John, That Quesadilla, Matt B, and David for your donations tonight. If you want to donate, there will be a Stripe link in the description, or you can do a super chat. And please do ask a question because we will always read out the super chats. And tell a friend about the podcast. Let's get more people in here. Let's get more interaction. Let's get more smart football talk going on. Thank you everyone so much. We'll be back later in the week, as I said, with the Super Bowl 48 tape breakdown of the defense and, going really deep into the calls and why they work and all that cool of stuff. And maybe we'll have some more Seahawks news. I mean, we're not going to react to every single interview being announced. As we said as well, there's already been a lot reported. It sounds like there's going to be a lot more too. So thank you, everyone. Griff, do you have any wisdom, closing thoughts?
No.
A lot of pressure there.
I just want to see Pete coach again in 2024.
Let the man just enjoy, his big family. Let him go catch some waves, some sun.
Pete, come on the podcast. Let's talk the origination of your cover 3 match.
Yeah, get pressure Pete Carroll into the podcast, guys.
If he doesn't coach again, we might actually get concrete answers out of him.
Yeah. Or we'll just ask him like, hey, so back in 1994. Right. Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.